At this time, we also have a great deal of uh, innovation as far as the methods of teaching reading. And one of the greatest ideas that was purported to create readers was the use of fables. When we examine some of the early primers used in the late 17th and early 18th centuries, we gain some insight into this process. The logical approach chosen by most teachers at that time appears to be very linear, progressing in difficulty from one-syllable word lists to two-syllable word lists, and gradually increasing to multisyllabic words for the better readers. Other approaches include the recitation of open syllables that demonstrate the vowel sounds. The reader must progress through these stages successfully before being invited to read meaningful, and finally, sentences. The emphasis seems to be on reading aloud rather than on comprehension. This is an approach that the public periodically demands again, prompting literacy educators to return to it again and again, only to read excludes practice in the comprehension skills that students need to become successful readers. In 1838, Horace Mann, who was then Secretary of the Massachusetts Board of Education, expressed a great deal of dismay at the lack of comprehension that pupils displayed. The American primer was improved and dedicated, of course, to all things American. Now in 1780, we see the beginning of a truly American way of thinking in early textbooks. Dedications in the frontispieces of early primers shed insight into the origin and the date of publication, as well as the name of the individual printer. This one is showing the Honorable John Hancock, Esquire, who was previously a governor of Massachusetts. So we have a new pride in the American doing things. And it's also interesting to note that printing was more carefully controlled by Parliament in Great Britain than it could ever be in the colonies, and this most certainly led to a divergence of thinking on a number of topics, representative government, for one thing. A sense of the importance of all things American becomes apparent in examining texts at the end of the 18th century. Patriotic motifs appear, demonstrating the pervasive influence of government in literacy and education. This is the tradition that was adopted from Great Britain and one that is likely to continue. Here we have a new American spelling book by Robert Ross, also introducing grammar. Advertising by authors provides evidence of the beginning of a market for school textbooks. Early schoolmasters developed their own methods of literacy instruction and included testimonials, advertising, and directions for teachers in their texts. This one gives a history of literacy and education in the world and implies that the separation of church and state was often required for education to exist. Later, important linguistic elements were tools for teachers. Vowel combinations were identified, and teachers were used with students. Webster's Blueback Speller became an important tool for teachers. Webster was critical of American schools and set out to make improvements with his own speller. Noah Webster collected words and took over 27 years to create a standard for American English. The speller included examples of vowel sounds, variations of vowel sounds, and consonant blends. The rise of publishing began with the creation of McGuffey's Readers in the later half of the 19th century. Emphasis continued on oral reading and articulation, modulation of tone, and poetry. The English language was beginning to develop. This was the beginning of the and also on moralistic kinds of text. It appears that conveying feelings and ideas was most important. Specific instructions on the combinations, along with the exercises on and tone, were included. One of the worst offenses was reading in a monotone voice. The McGuffey readers included stories in which children did, and often little girls were praised for their work over boys. In the story of Goody Two-Shoes, a little girl's triumphs over poverty by learning to read, teaching others, and doing good deeds for all. In the 1930s, the Elson Readers became the modern version of readers used by schools and are still for sale today. These were followed by Dickens. Mid-20th century icons Dick and Jane and their imitators became familiar to American children as the perfect family. They firmly established the idea of reading series in our psyche, and publishers in a period of growth through the sale of these texts to many school districts. Only a few publishers of reading series exist today, as the market has narrowed and become more specialized, a result of governmental influence in the literacy process. To understand how to move forward with educational reform on a national basis, we must continue to re-examine how we arrived at our present status. The structure and format of American education and literacy instruction is always a response to the economic and demographic demands of the times. The methods of the historian serve us well as a way to examine the literacy material that provides evidence of dual language instruction, linear phonetic approaches to teaching reading, government influence, textbook publishing trends, and regional differences in educational preferences. Choosing the right methods for the times we are in is the perennial challenge we now face.